Hello, hello. Thank you so much for tuning into this ASMR true crime soft spoken video. Today I'm going to be doing a requested case of Jaclyn Dowaliby. So thank you so much for the suggestion. I'm going through the list, so we'll get started. Jaclyn Marie Dalabys was born May 17th, 1981 in Chicago, Illinois. She was born to mother Cynthia and biological father Jimmy Guess. Her biological father had been in and out of trouble as a kid, and he met Cynthia when she was 13 or 14 years old at a roller skate rink where he worked. They dated for 7 years, then married after Cynthia became pregnant with Jaclyn. The two were married for a short time before separating. Cynthia states the separation occurred prior to Jaclyn being born, but her father states they were married for about a year. It did end in a very bitter divorce. Cynthia had then met David Dalabys around 1983, and the two began dating and eventually married. David adopted Jaclyn 6 months after marrying Cynthia. In 1984, they had a son named Davy, making Jaclyn a big sister. So Jaclyn didn't know her biological father, but Jimmy Guess says he kept informed about her through his mother Jackie, who was close to Jaclyn. So in 1988, Jaclyn is 7 years old and living with her family in Middle Lothian, Illinois, a south suburb of Chicago. The family lived in a single-family home owned by David's mother, Anna, who lived in the basement apartment along with the family. Eventually, Jimmy Guess had moved to Florida to do some construction work, but on May 23rd, 1988, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for 2 counts of sexual battery threatening with a deadly weapon and 1 count of attempted sexual battery. So, on September 9th, 1988, David arrives home at 4:30 p.m. He then leaves around 6 to go bowling at the Anchor Bowl in Blue Island. He returned home from bowling around 9:20 p.m. Cynthia, Jaclyn, Davy, Anna, and Michelle Goldrick, who was David's sister, were all home. His sister left shortly after David arrived home. Jaclyn went to her room with a Christmas catalog and went to bed around 10:30 p.m. David, Cynthia, and Davy sat in the family room watching television. David went to bed around 10:30 while Cynthia and Davy were still watching TV. Cynthia watched television until 11:30. Before going to bed, she turned off the lights in the living room and checked on the children. Jaclyn had fallen asleep with her overhead light on, which Cynthia turned off. Cynthia left the doors to the children's room open and left her bedroom door ajar, and then she went to sleep. Hannah left the home that evening around 10:30 to go to Pappuccino's restaurant in Oak Forest. Hannah stated that she went out the back door of the house and checked to make sure it was locked. Hannah stated that she, in the past, had used both the front and back doors, but in that September of 1988, she did not have the key to the front door. Hannah did not return home that night, which, like, Grandma was partying, I guess. Damn, the Pappuccinos. On the morning of September 10th, David woke up with Davy early in the morning, and they tried to be quiet as not to wake the family. At approximately 7:15 a.m., David discovered the front door was slightly open. At first, he thought that his mother had come home early and left the door open. Her car was not in the driveway, but then he assumed that she had left again while leaving the door open. At around 9 a.m., Cynthia woke up and went into Jaclyn's room to wake her. When she goes into her room to see, Jaclyn is not in her bed. She goes downstairs, and her and David begin looking around the house for her. David then suggests that Jaclyn may have gone outside, so he begins looking for her around the neighborhood. In the meantime, Hannah came home for the first time since she had left around 10:30 p.m. that Friday. Cynthia went back into Jaclyn's room, searching around the house, and discovered that Jaclyn's comforter was missing, which was unusual as Jaclyn would not have taken it with her to go outside. When Cynthia walked down her driveway to go to a neighbor's house, she noticed that the basement window had been broken. They immediately called the police. Police respond to the call. Upon examining the home, they see the wire screen and the front of the basement window had been ripped back, but it was partially intact in its frame. Glass was lying around the outside area where the basement window was located. Donald Woodark, a police officer who responded on the scene, stated that upon examining Anna's bedroom where the broken window was located, he observed an even layer of dust on the inside window ledge. However, on his initial police report dated September 10, 1988, he wrote that the method of entry was the broken basement window. He did not report the dust on the window ledge. The first time Woodark mentioned the presence of dust was in a supplemental report written on September 27, 1988, 17 days later. Within hours of the missing report, police and the FBI responded to the home and waited for a ransom demand, but no call came. On Wednesday, September 14th, 1988, 4 days after her disappearance, Michael Chapman, who lived at the Islander Apartments in Blue Island, which was about 9 minutes away from the Dalabys home, arrived in the rear parking lot of his home at about 5:45 p.m. when he smelled a strong, foul odor. When he looked in the weeds and bushes, he saw something wrapped in covering. He took one step in, moved the bush back, and saw what appeared to be a small body face up, 1 to 2 feet from the parking lot. There was a sheet covering most of the body, except for the arm and head. Jaclyn described that area as so heavily overgrown with bush and 6-foot weeds along the parking lot pavement. The next morning, the body had been identified via dental records as Jaclyn. It was initially believed from the appearance of the body that she had been hit over the head, but the Cook County medical examiner, Dr. Robert Stein, reported that it had been caused by advanced decomposition because it was an unusually hot September. A 6-foot length of rope had been wrapped around her neck. The medical examiner could not determine with certainty whether Jaclyn had been sexually assaulted or not due to the state of decomposition, while an exact time of death could not be determined. Dr. Robert Stein estimated that she had been dead for a number of days, which was most likely early that Saturday morning, shortly after she disappeared. Also found at the scene was Jaclyn's comforter and nightgown. At 6:30 p.m., police officers Cash Reiki and LA were at the Dalabys home where they learned that the body had been discovered. When Cynthia was told that Jaclyn's body had been found, she burst into tears and collapsed. When David returned home at 7 p.m., he was told what happened and he sat down and cried. From the beginning, police were working 2 angles of the investigation: a stranger abduction and the interrogation of Jaclyn's parents. They questioned both for hours, having them describe what they were doing the morning Jaclyn disappeared. Cynthia and David were questioned a number of times over the following days and subjected to polygraph examinations. While this is not uncommon in missing children's cases, the investigation was narrowed down very quickly after one of the forensic examiners said that he believed the basement window had been broken from the inside. 2 days after the discovery of her body, police canvassed residents of the apartment behind where she was found. Among these interviewed was a man named Everett Mann, who had aspired to be a police officer, but had been rejected because he suffered from bipolar disorder. Mann claimed that at about 2 a.m. on September 10th, he had seen someone with, quote, a large, straight nose, pulling away from what he later learned was the location of the body. He said he could not tell whether it was a man or woman, but he thought he or she was Caucasian. He described the car as a dark color, dark blue, navy blue, black, or dark brown. Later, at the police station, Mann was shown an array of photographs of possible suspects and asked which nose structure most resembled the one he had seen. He identified David Dowaliby. In subsequent interviews, Mann's description of the car changed. First, it had been merely dark colored, then it became mid-sized, then, quote, the latest 70s version of Chevy Malibu, and then finally it became, quote, about a 1979 Chevy Malibu. Cynthia Dalabys owned a 1980 Chevrolet Malibu. It was light blue, not dark, but the police surmised that it might somehow have been able to appear as dark. The car was forensically examined, but there was no evidence that a body had been transported in it. Robert Clifford, the head of the South Suburban Prosecutions for the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, was skeptical of Mann's identification. He enlisted Blue Island Police Chief Paul Graves to join him in an experiment, a reenactment of Mann's identification of a man with a big nose from 75 yards away. They concluded that it was impossible to see a nose structure from that distance. But Clifford was not in charge of the prosecution. Patrick O'Brien, who was the head of the office's felony trial division, was. And based on Mann's identification of David and the assumption that the window had been broken from the inside, O'Brien obtained grand jury indictments on November 22nd, 1988, charging David and Cynthia with murder and concealing a homicide. They were both arrested immediately. Cynthia was about 2 to 3 months pregnant when she was arrested. The very next day, O'Brien received a forensic report establishing that the force that had been broken in the basement window had come from the outside. Apparently, perhaps to minimize noise, whoever had broken the window had punctured it and then removed several large pieces of glass, placing them on the ground outside. But O'Brien was undaunted by the forensic findings. The Dalabys remained in jail until friends and family members posted bond, securing Cynthia's release on December 15th and David's the next day. While the case was pending, Robert Clifford, who had left the state's attorney's office, informed the Dalabys defense attorney that Greaves had a tape recording of the police interviews with Mann. In response to the defense subpoena, O'Brien surrendered the recording. It had been withheld in violation of law, but O'Brien claimed that he was unaware of the existence until he asked Greaves about it after receiving the subpoena. Once the defense had a copy of the recording, Mann could no longer alter his story to make the identification stronger. On April 5th, 1990, the Dalabys joint trial opened before the Cook County Circuit Court Judge Richard E. Neville. The defense argued the identification was preposterous because Mann was approximately 75 feet away and it was dark in that evening with almost no moonlight. In addition, the photos shown to Mann of David were frontal photographs, not side views. And most importantly, David's photo was 30% larger than the other 4 men that Mann was shown, making it pretty obvious who they wanted to get picked. The 2 additional eyewitnesses came forward claiming they had seen Cynthia's car near the abandoned lot where Jaclyn's body was found, but the defense was able to discredit these sightings. They were able to confirm Cynthia's car was in front of the Dalabys' home the same time the witness claimed to see it. The prosecution questioned if it was possible to enter the home through the window and not disturb the dust and items below that included a nightstand with a makeup tray on it. A video was presented by David showing one of his neighbors entering through the window, and the man was able to enter without disturbing any of the items. Still more evidence was presented, including a blood-stained pillow found in Jaclyn's bedroom and head hairs thought to be Jaclyn's that were found in the Dalabys vehicle. Also, Davy had claimed that his big sister got spanked a lot, and the neighbors said that the rope matched one of the Dalabys in the garage of the Dalabys that the son often played with. At the conclusion of the prosecution case on May 1st, the judge directed a verdict of not guilty for Cynthia, holding the evidence against her was insufficient to sustain a guilty verdict. Although the only difference in the evidence against Cynthia and David was the identification by Everett Mann, the judge left David's fate to the jury. On May 3rd, after 14 hours of deliberation, the jury convicted him. The judge sentenced him to consecutive terms of 40 years for murder and 5 years for concealing a homicide. In July 1990, the Chicago Tribune published a 2-part series by David Protez, a professor at Northwestern University Medical School of Journalism, and based on the interviews with the Dalabys. As a result, a juror contacted David and told him that she had regretted the guilty verdict, but had caved to the pressure from other jurists. On October 30th, 1991, the Illinois Appellate Court unanimously reversed David's conviction without the possibility of retrial, holding that the judge had erred in not directing a verdict in David's case as he done in Cynthia's. Cook County State's Attorney Jack O'Malley announced that he would appeal the Illinois Supreme Court and meanwhile would oppose David's release on bond. On November 11th, over O'Malley's objection, the Supreme Court set bond, and after depositing it, David was released 2 days later. He had spent 583 days behind bars, counting 24 days in jail after his arrest in 1988. On February 5th, 1992, the Supreme Court rejected O'Malley's appeal, officially ending the case. 9 months later, on January 4th, 1993, a spokesman for Cook County's State's Attorney Office announced that the investigation into Jaclyn's murder had been reopened, but nothing came of the investigation, and this case remains unsolved. David and Cynthia are still married and live about 40 miles from the home where their daughter was abducted. They now go by new names. If anyone has information about the murder of Jaclyn Dowaliby, please call the police department at 708-385-2534 and email the Illinois State Police at isp.crimetips@illinois.gov. Alright, so we will go into the theories in this case. The first initial theory is the one by the police, stating that it was David Dowaliby or David and Cynthia. So the police and FBI continue to maintain they got the original investigation right, and that David Dalabys was likely the culprit. The case against him was allegedly that he had struck Jaclyn during an argument and killed her. He then may have not told Cynthia after she fell asleep, and then he could have wrapped Jaclyn in the comforter, wrapped the rope from the backyard, and carried her to his car before driving to where her body was later located. Another theory suggests that perhaps Cynthia and David were involved together. The crime against the Dalabys as a couple is much the same as the case against David, though it was suggested that if Jaclyn was fatally injured during an argument, it may have been Cynthia who struck her. Cynthia is not believed to be involved in dumping Jaclyn, as her car was never identified by any witness. The primary reason Cynthia is to be suspected along with David is that the killer would have carried Jaclyn out of the home through the front door that was found open the next day. This meant that they would have passed the couple's bedroom with the body already going out into the backyard to get the rope used later. The prosecution doubted that both David and Cynthia had slept through all of this. I think based on how all the evidence was not solid, that's hard. And I think a lot of people do not believe that David or Cynthia were involved. Another theory is that Timothy Guess, who's the brother of Jaclyn's biological father, was involved. After NBC's Unsolved Mysteries broadcasted a segment on the case, a tip came in that said that they had provided a false alibi for the night Jaclyn disappeared. Timothy Guess had told the police and the FBI that he had spent the entire night at an all-night restaurant in South Suburban Harvey. 2 waitresses had collaborated the alibi at the time. They were interviewed later and stated that in fact, Timothy Guess had only been there bravely around 9:30 p.m. They said that they had lied because they believed that the Dalabys were guilty and wanted to see them go to jail. Several customers had been at the restaurant who had never been questioned by police. It's also said that Timothy Guess had not been there. In addition, it was discovered that another waitress at the restaurant, Margaret Murphy, lived in the apartment complex wherever a man lived, and that Timothy often drove her home. Murphy said that she had never been questioned by police, but before the Dowaliby trial, she says that prosecutors had instructed her not to talk to the defense lawyers. On December 17, 1992, David protests. The professor at the journalism school and a colleague conducted a taped interview of Timothy, who said he had begun hearing voices when he was a young child and had been in and out of mental institutions, had suffered repeated blackouts, had taken various drugs, legal and illegal, for most of his life. And since the age of 16, Timothy said he had been guided by a spirit who, quotes, gives me psychic powers that enabled him to precisely describe the layout and interior of the Dowaliby home, where he had never been. When asked how to get to Jaclyn's room, he said, quote, I walked past Davy's room, quickly adding, that's a spirit talking, not me. I didn't say nothing. I just released information. Timothy insisted that he had been at the Harvey restaurant the entire night that Jaclyn disappeared. When asked why customers and waitresses said otherwise, he explained, quote, "Maybe I was invisible that day. The spirit can help me do that. I was there physically, but no one could notice me." Another suspect had come up, and that was of a convicted sex offender. The defense focused on a convicted sex offender named Perry Hernandez, who committed a similar abduction 1 year after Jaclyn's murder. However, evidence found that Jaclyn's body did not match him, and he was cleared by authorities. And then, of course, the last theory being the possibility of a random target. There's many who say that the layout of the home, which I believe was a split level, I think, was a familiar built home in the area that someone may have been familiar with without having to go into that exact home. So this might have allowed them to be able to enter the home and out of the home with a little bit more ease. I personally am leaning more towards the uncle of all those interviews, and the way that he described the house seems very sketch to me, but this case is so sad. She was just like this really cute little girl, and I hate the unsolved ones with kids. It's so heartbreaking, but I really hope, like with all of them, that there are some answers. But I'm wondering what you guys think about this one. But thank you so much for this suggestion. And I hope that you are having a good day or night wherever you are. And have a good day tomorrow. And I'm going to see you in my next video.